till I start talking.
I'll say this for him, he's consistent.
Well, he's been so consistent all year.
Not the taste, consistency.
Consistently, yes.
Consistency! Thanks, losers.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another week of the Fantasy Football Consistency Show. We have a very, very special show this week. It is the basically our show after the NFL draft, which just happened this past weekend. And we've also got a very special guest, one of BGFS's favorite writers, outside of course, Ron and I, Colby Conway. Colby, Mr. Fantasy Alarm, how are you? It's good to have you here. What's been going on?
Oh, it's good to be back. It just seems as if we're about a week or two closer until my Texans are back in the mix and back atop the AFC South where they belong, unlike some of the other teams. And I know Ron's Colts can stay where they've been the past couple years.
Yeah, they're going to suck. It doesn't matter. So exciting draft this weekend. We won't even get into the Browns picks, whether you like them, dislike them. I will say one thing real quick, because I know we're short on time with Colby being here tonight, but I find it amazingly interesting on the 50-50. It's probably even higher. It's probably more 70-30 against Baker Mayfield in this area. I love Baker Mayfield. I think he's a winner. I think he's going to be a very good quarterback down the road. I just like the kid's attitude. But the problem in this area is, of course, is that this is Ohio State country. And they have no love for the young man who kicked their ass at Ohio State Stadium and then decided to plant the Oklahoma flag right in the middle of the field after the game. So they hate him with a passion. They don't care if he wins a Super Bowl. I think they'll always hate them. But I just found it hilariously funny every time I talk to somebody, because I can tell right away if they're a real true blue Buckeye fan, or they get it that we got a really, a good player. And so I don't know what you guys are hearing across the country or what your thoughts are, but that's what's been happening here recently. So that's why I just think it's hilarious.
It's kind of the same deal for me. I mean, I don't know necessarily at that top spot. To me, I think my favorite quarterback was Sam Darnold. That's who I probably would have taken, but I don't think that getting Mayfield at 1 overall is bad at all. I think he can come in, and I don't know if he's going to be the guy next year, but who knows? It's not out of the question too that he's going to get some starts next year as well.
Well, the funny thing about Darnold is that we kicked Darnold's ass when we played against him, and they're all like, "We want Darnold. Why would we not draft Darnold?" I go, "Wait a minute, didn't Ohio State kill him? Didn't they pretty much shut him down?" They're like, "Well, yeah," and I go, "Well, then he can't win at Ohio State. How's he going to win in the NFL?" And then I just walk away because I'm just arguing stupidity. But so, Ron, what have you heard?
Well, same deal. I mean, it was a little bit, it just kind of like everybody else, a little bit of a shocker at number 1. I think it wasn't really clear cut who they were taking, even though the Browns GM said he had it figured out for about 6 weeks and he wouldn't tell anybody, including his wife. But the hype train picked up there the last couple of days, and so I don't think it's bad. I mean, the thing about Baker Mayfield is he's one of those polarizing guys. You either love him or you hate him. And to me, when my team's drafting a quarterback, I think I'd rather have one of those guys that has that swagger. That is one of those leaders. And he, win or lose, he's going to go out, give him everything he's got. He's going to go in there and he's going to gunsling, and he's going to try to bring you back if it's fourth quarter comeback, or he's going to try to go out and put the dagger in as far as getting a victory. So I think that's something that's not real. Obviously, you can't teach that,
Yeah.
So I think that's something that is solid. And I think that might have been what kind of set him apart. To me, it seems like he's that guy as far as that quarterback class that has that gunslinger mentality.
Right. Plus, you have to give credit where credit is due for his picture that he took looking like Brett Favre from the 90s with his short shorts and everybody in their T-shirts to kind of mock that scene from the NFL draft way back when Favre. And that alone, I gave a high five and said, "Yep, I want that kid." Anybody can think of that and reinvent that was hilarious. So even Brett Favre commented to my buddy who drove Favre a couple years ago. He said, "What did you think of the picture?" And he goes, "I loved it. It was one of the favorite." And Favre loves Mayfield as well. So he's got that going for him, which is nice. So anyway, tonight we have our special guest, Colby Conway from Fantasy Alarm, also a member of course, Big Guy Fantasy Sports. And, we just thought this would be a great time for the three of us to kind of share our thoughts and maybe just kind of go through some of our favorite picks, first rounds, and then beyond that of guys we think could have some consistency value, some fantasy value, but then where do we honestly feel the consistency is going to fall out? Because as you know, there's an article out every year that I write that kind of talks about consistency and rookies and the fact that less than 9% of all rookies since 2010, especially those drafted in the first 4 rounds, do not exceed 60% consistency in their rookie season. And it fluctuates between, the quarterbacks, running backs, that kind of stuff. I mean, there's only been basically 4 quarterbacks since then, 15 running backs, 9 receivers, 2 tight ends in that time frame. So as we look at this tonight, if we pick somebody that's going to be over 60%, we're putting them in a pretty high class at this point. But that was our goal tonight. We want to go through this, kind of share our thoughts on these players, the ones we like, and where we think are going to fall out. So, Colby, we're going to start with you as our special guest. Why don't you give us your first pick and what you think about him, where he's going, and what his consistency percent you think he'll end up with at the end of the year.
So I'm going with Mike Gesicki up from Penn State, up in my neck of the woods, and he was selected at the 10th overall in the second round, so I believe that'd be pick 42, I believe, and he went to the Miami Dolphins. So there is some things going for him in that Adam Gase loves to use the tight ends. We saw it back during his time in Denver, and he tried last year, but he had the washed-up soul that was Julius Thomas, so you couldn't get much of it going on. But they also drafted another tight end a couple rounds later in the draft. I still expect Gesicki to start. However, like you mentioned, Bob, just a couple seconds ago, that tight ends and rookies and consistency aren't very synonymous with one another. And when you look last year, Evan Engram was above that 60% threshold, even eclipsed the 70% mark. But then you have O.J. Howard in his first year with Tampa. He was only 43% consistent. Not quite sure what we're getting for Ryan Tannehill coming off what I believe is his second knee injury now. So while I do expect Gesicki to log the lion's share of snaps at tight end for the Dolphins, his consistency will be below 50% despite starting likely all 16 games this season.
Okay, and any thoughts, though? I'll kind of help play devil's advocate, and then we'll let Ron jump in. As you mentioned earlier, there was a lot of love for Julius Thomas coming into Miami because he was with Gase back in Denver, and that just didn't work out. And I guess we'll write it off to maybe Julius Thomas being physically out, over the hill, and just didn't really help the offense very much. But the Dolphins lost Jarvis Landry in the offseason. So they're basically down to Devontae Parker, Kenny Stills, which is okay 1-2 punch, but not great. Do you think that actually maybe gives Gesicki a little bit more consistency value because they might need him as kind of the, quote, third receiver with Kenyon Drake coming out of the backfield as a running back, that he might see a little more than what we'd expect with the loss of Jarvis Landry in Miami?
Well, absolutely. I mean, Landry's what seems like 350 targets a year are now opened up. So, and especially at his size at 6'6" and nearly 250 pounds, Gesicki's going to be a big body for Tannehill to throw to. And when you look at what they said about Gesicki coming out of college, smooth in his release. And I'm looking here at NFL.com for his prospect report. He can work the seam. However, maybe getting in and out of routes might be a little bit of a problem. So for him, you might see some of those seam routes when you get to the end zone. He might get a couple fades. However, with this offense and kind of knowing how it is, especially when they get down in the red zone, it's probably going to be a lot of Kenyon Drake. And somehow Kenny Stills is the one who always ends up catching the touchdowns, right? No matter what. Landry got a few last year finally. Yeah. So
Ron,
there's a lot to like.
I mean, the production's got to come from somewhere, and he's like Colby said, he's a big body. He's going to be tough to cover at 6'6", 250, 247, whatever he is. Runs a 4.5. So I mean, for that size, it's pretty good speed. But when you think about the tight end has just been a vast hole of nothingness for years in Miami. I mean, you talked about Julius Jones. Another guy that comes to mind was Anthony Fasano was the guy at tight end for a couple of years, and we all have seen how that went down. So I don't know necessarily if Tannehill's ever had a guy there he can count on. I know they brought a few guys in through free agency, and whether it be just lack of production or injuries, they haven't panned out very, very well. So, I mean, he steps in, and to me, when I look down the list there, I mean, I know they signed Amendola, they have Parker, they have Stills, which is okay. But when I look at the weapons they have offensively, he looks like he's going to be right up there at the top as far as what Ryan Tannehill's going to have to choose from as far as his arsenal. And so I look for him to be fairly consistent. I don't know necessarily if we could put him in that 60% range, but I think he'll show some flashes, and I think it might be something similar to what we saw maybe with George Kittle last year. Is maybe a little bit of a slow start. He was a later round guy as well. Kind of turned it on there towards the end of the season. It really showed out as far as his athletic ability, and especially when Jimmy Grapes came to town, became kind of a favorite of his as well. But I think his biggest problem is just going to be if Ryan Tannehill is going to be the quarterback that can get him the football. But I think you might like him a little bit more in PPR as far as a tight end, just because I think he can be that check down guy that could be maybe your 3 catches for 35 and a score every once in a while, just because of his size. But I like him. I think he can put up a little bit more consistency than some of the wide receivers that got drafted early on.
Right. Okay, well, good start. Colby, we know you have limited time to be on with us tonight. I know you can't be probably on with us for the full hour. So we're going to let you go with your second pick, and then we'll come back to us a little bit later. So give us your next guy that you kind of like, the pick and where he's going, and what you think about his fantasy value and consistency value for 2018.
Absolutely. So at the 24th pick in the first round, the Carolina Panthers went with DJ Moore out of Maryland. And we've seen with Carolina, they kind of have a type at receiver that they look for. They look for these bigger guys, the Kelvin Benjamins and the Devin Funcheses of the world. And they finally started adding some speed to that receiver core. But with Moore, they finally get that healthy mix that they're looking for. Moore may only be 6 feet, but he can move a little bit. The only worry I have is with that quarterback in Carolina who, it's another year, and I still won't say his name.
Well, we love him here, by the way, Colby. I don't know if you know that.
Oh, you can.
We love for bashing him. He's joking.
I don't say his name.
No,
like a cardinal sin. But no, Moore can bring a lot to this offense. But you look last year at the consistency marks for the Carolina receivers. So you had Funchess at 63%, and Kelvin Benjamin was at 63% during his time. But then after that, I mean, Russell Shepard, Damiere Byrd were at 7% and 13% respectively, and then the other 3 guys were nearly irrelevant. So with this sort of offense, not to mention that you still have Greg Olsen at tight end for likely one more year, and Christian McCaffrey coming out of the backfield, is this an offense that can really sustain 2 fantasy relevant wide receivers? I think it's going to be one of those things where DJ Moore and Devin Funchess almost eat away at each other, since we know that Olsen and McCaffrey have such a set role in that offense. So Moore could have a tough time producing in bunches this season, likely becomes yet another statistic in that first-round receiver that might not pay off as many expect early on. Consistency, he should be above 50%, but I wouldn't go much higher than that. So say he plays the full 16 games this year, I'll give him 9 consistent games, with the majority of those coming just above the consistency threshold.
All right, so interesting enough, they held the first fantasy mock draft today on SiriusXM with your typical guys, Howard Bender from Fantasy Alarm, Mike Clay, Bob Harris, et cetera. And in the 11th round, interestingly enough, Mike Gesicki and DJ Moore were picks, and this was the 11th, 10th round? 11th round, pick number 10 for Gesicki, so 11-10 for Gesicki, and 11-12. So basically late 11th round for both of them. What do you feel? How do you feel about that from a value perspective? The DJ Moore was the 5th receiver picked on that team. Gesicki was the first and only, I guess wasn't the only tight end, but he was the first tight end and basically starting tight end picked for the team at the 10th pick.
I'm okay with it. I like the Moore being the wide receiver number 5 than Gesicki being going into the year as your tight end, but I'm okay with that valuation, especially if you look too with Hansen's team in front of Moore. He's got guys like Sterling Shepard, Corey Davis, Allen Robinson, and Julio Jones. You can go ahead and take a chance on a DJ Moore at that point. But with David Kitchen, what I like what he did, so he took Gesicki, took the upside play while there is some risk, but he backed it up with guys like George Kittle and Ricky Seals-Jones.
Right, that's true. He took Kittle with the round in front of him. So, yeah, I think good values. And I don't argue with that as well. Ron, your thoughts on DJ Moore, his consistency value, and where he's falling out, at least right now, fantasy valuation ADP-wise?
Well, I thought that as I look at the Carolina Panthers roster and their depth chart, I thought the Colts roster was bad, but I mean, I look at this and there's not a lot to like here offensively, especially that wide receiver spot. And so, Colby, I like the point you made about them, possibly him and Devin Funchess eating into each other's production. I don't even really consider Torrey Smith as a guy that I'm going to draft anywhere, and so I don't even put him in the mix. But I think that Moore could be a pretty solid value, like for where he went in that draft, just out of necessity for them to be able to throw to somebody. I don't know who else really is going to get the catches. I think Funchess is going to be your number 1 on that team, but then I think beyond that it's going to be kind of up for grabs. So I think Moore's got a nice shot to come in and contribute. But it's just, as I was kind of looking, the guy I'm going to talk about later on is one of my picks, Cortland Sutton. As we were doing the mock draft that we did with a lot of the with Keith Lott and a lot of those guys as the week went on, I was looking at Cortland Sutton and I just looked at some of these receivers, and I don't know if necessarily any of them I would have drafted in the first round if I'm an NFL GM. So I don't know if they really had that first round pedigree for any of these guys in this year's draft. The other thing too is, as I look at that roster, I like the Ian Thomas pick at tight end in the 4th round as well. So he's there behind Greg Olsen. We don't know what we're going to get from Greg Olsen because he was a little up and down last year coming off the injury. So I think that when I look around the guys that are picked in this vicinity, I think you're fine there taking a shot on some of them. You look at who was kind of bunched up right there. I mentioned George Kittle with the Gesicki comparisons. And like Colby said, you can take a shot on DJ Moore. Just you got to back up. You got to make sure you're not counting heavily on these guys. I don't think there's too many guys in this draft class that I'm going to count heavily on my team. And if they are, they're probably running backs. There's not a whole lot of wide receivers or tight ends that I'm hoping that it shakes out in a draft that I have to actually count on for production going into this season every week.
Yeah, good point. Like you said, I was kind of trying to look to see if where the first rookie wide receiver went in today's fantasy draft, and I still haven't found one. So it looks like it could be DJ Moore, and I think it is, which is surprising because you would think Ridley would have been above that, but I don't see him on there. I see Sutton. You guys can help if you'd like, but I don't see him.
Ridley was middle of the 11th round, so he would be first.
Oh, okay. So he was just right before him. So yeah,
he kind of started the run there. It looks like.
Yeah. So and that makes sense. Again, you're in the 11th round. It was the 4th receiver on Kelly's team. So but that guy had AJ Green, Baldwin, and Chris Hogan. So. Ridley is your 4th, doesn't suck. So, all right, Ron, we're going to move on to you with your first choice. You went with the chalky easy pick, which is fine because that somebody has to pick him. So, why don't you tell us about this unknown player named Saquon Barkley?
Yeah, big surprise here that he went in the 1st round, 2nd pick. And one of the reasons I picked him is because I almost think it's laughable the fact that there's people saying that because of what position he plays, that they're giving the Giants a low draft grade. I don't know how you pass on a guy like this. I don't know necessarily if you look at Eli Manning. I don't know if he's ready to move on, but I do know that you look at everything that he had stacked against him last year. He had no receivers to throw to. He had no running game. He had a head coach that was a head case, although he was entertaining to listen to in press conferences. I'll give him that. But he had a whole lot of nothing in the cupboard to contribute to the offense. And so you get him healthy, Odell Beckham. You got Evan Ingram coming back. You got Sterling Shepard there. You got to draft this guy. I mean, the running back spot for them was a whole lot of nothing last year, and it's one of those things. They had I think 4 or 5 guys in there trying to contribute, and really nothing solid in there. he does everything. I mean, he's a franchise guy. You know, you look at what scouts say about him, that he can block, he can catch passes, he can run between the tackles. He's got good size for an NFL back. He's a face of the franchise type guy, and I think that's where they're kind of at in that transition. Eli's got a little bit of time left. He's that face of the franchise now, kind of passing that to Odell Beckham. And then, I think it's a nice little 1-2 punch there with Odell Beckham and Saquon Barkley in the next few years. I don't know necessarily if you see Beckham traded anywhere in the coming years or even the coming months or whatever. I think he's there to stay. And so I think it's a smart pick. I also like what they did on the offensive line. They brought in Nate Solder as a free agent. They got Will Hernandez at guard in the second round. A lot of mock drafts had him going in the late first round. A couple even had him in the mid first round. So I think I saw one where they had Indianapolis trading down to around the top, like the 21, 22, wherever Buffalo was at, and taking him. So, he graded out pretty highly, and I think that's going to allow them to be able to run a little bit. It's going to take a little bit of pressure off Eli Manning, which I think could open up some lanes and open up some catches for Barkley. But he's going to do everything they ask him. He's a 4.4, ran a 4.440 at the combine. And the other thing I like about him, too, is you got Pat Shurmur coming in there and Mike Shula's the offensive coordinator. They both have a history. If you look at their tendencies, they like to throw to the running back. So I think both in PPR, both in standard league, Saquon Barkley is going to be the most consistent guy that we're going to see come out of this draft. I don't think necessarily James Stewart or any of the running backs they have are really any threat to his production. You might see James Stewart spell him a little bit, but overall, he's the guy.
Okay.
Oh, did I say James Stewart?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going old school Jacksonville now.
Yeah, let's say you mean Jonathan Stewart, right?
Well, I think either one of them could probably give an equal challenge at this stage
exactly,
to Saquon
right.
Barkley. He's by far the best guy there, and so it is chalky. But at the same time, he went first round in this draft, and I have no problem with that. He's going to be most consistent. It wouldn't shock me if you saw 75% consistency
Okay.
from
So
him.
that was I was going to say I was waiting for a number. I was going to say, all right, give him a number. It says because of anybody of all the players as I mentioned earlier at the kind of beginning of the show, the running backs have. Of the guys who have been over 60% consistent, half of the players that have done it since 2010 are running backs, including 3 last year: Fournette, Kamara, 4, McCaffrey, and Hunt. So, I agree with you. Barkley and 75% seems, I think, reasonable. Even if he hits 70, it's still very impressive. But I don't know if there's going to be 3 or 4 running backs, and we're going to probably talk about a few others later. But I don't know if the other ones have the team makeup in that to hit that. Colby, any disagreements? Well, Colby, why don't you tell us if you have any disagreements on Barkley at 75%, and then we're going to talk about the fantasy value of Saquon Barkley.
No, I'm fine with it. I think he's going to get enough volume to really pay off on that 75% fresh mark that we're putting on him. And from the early looks of it, he's got a favorable schedule for running backs. Obviously, there's still so much that can happen, but
Right.
Barkley's going to be a guy. He's going to be drafted first round in most leagues, so I'm fine with that consistency mark.
And I think Ron said it best too. What I thought was more important than the Giants getting Barkley was the fact that the Giants then also spent a lot of draft picks on offensive linemen, which was obviously their biggest need. And once they got Barkley, they certainly went out and got that. So Barkley in today's fantasy draft went number 8 overall, first round, 8th pick, before Odell Beckham, Kareem Hunt, Leonard Fournette, Dalvin Cook, etc., etc. If you guys are doing a fantasy draft, I don't care if it's today or if it's in August, if everybody is healthy, are you going to take Saquon Barkley at 1-8 in your 12-team PPR draft? I'm not.
I have no problem with it. I mean, I don't think it's bad at all. I mean, if you want him, you're going to have to take him at that point because he's not going to hang around. He's the hot name coming in, and as we know, whatever sport it is, wherever you're drafting, whether it's baseball with prospects, everybody wants the shiny new toy because they want to look like the smartest guy in the room. But this is just a no-brainer to me. I mean, he, like we said, we made the argument of the offensive line. He's the second pick overall. When's the last time we've seen a back come out with this kind of promise? So the running backs are a hot commodity in that first round. We talked about how they've kind of come back into favor, as you can see with this mock here. I mean, the majority of the first round is running backs. So I'm fine with him there. I'd gladly take him over any of those other guys that are listed there.
Okay. All right. Colby, do you agree?
I would probably do it the only way I would want to make sure is I would want Gurley, Bell, Johnson, and Zeke off the board as running backs first, and then Antonio Brown. I'm still up in the air on him. I got to do some more heading into this season. But then receivers wise, I'd want Antonio Brown and 100% consistency in 2017, DeAndre Hopkins.
Well, in this draft, all 6 of them are off the board. So those 6, then Kamara went 7, and then Barkley. But like I said, Fournette's still there. Melvin Gordon's still there.
Fournette would be tempting there.
Yeah.
McCaffrey, which I'm okay with him and maybe in front of McCaffrey. LaShawn McCoy. So just, Mark Ingram. So, So I wouldn't do it. I would probably look at some other thought process there. I probably would take Melvin Gordon just because I know what he can do. He's in the same team, same offense. And Barkley certainly could put up those numbers, and that's perfectly fine if people want to do that. You obviously 2 out of 3 of us are saying that you do it. I'm just a little bit leery just because it's New York and it's the Giants, and they're kind of like the Browns of the NFC. They kind of seem to screw things up even when they've got, decent stuff, decent team going on there. So, but interesting nonetheless. So, all right. So we're going to move on to my pick, and I'm going to go with the wonderful Alabama wide receiver, Calvin Ridley, who was picked in the first round by the Atlanta Falcons. We all know about Ridley. He's the Amari Cooper comparisons are exhausting when you read everything about him. He's coming from Alabama. He broke all of Cooper's records, blah, blah, blah. However, it also talks about how he's, and I'm looking at NFL.com kind of analyst stuff of, strengths and weaknesses, and it certainly talks about, his strengths, which he certainly has some, but the things I read about, easily impeded by contact off the line of scrimmage, can be shut down by a quality bump and run, has a lot of drops, struggles with focus, scouts question his toughness to catch in the middle, dances after catches instead of trying to hit it upfield. Sounds like Amari Cooper to me, folks. And we all know what Amari's Cooper's. In fact, there was a thing at the bottom of each one of these guys, and it's from some either team scout, general manager, whatever, and it says, I haven't seen all of them yet, but I doubt anyone in this class will touch him at this position. You wish he was a little bigger and stronger, but he can get open on just about any route you want. I think he's still a step below where Amari Cooper was coming out. Now, let's go back to that. Amari Cooper coming out, his rookie season, 21st in total points, 50% consistency, and hasn't gotten much better since. So that scares me a little bit. On the positive side, though, Calvin Ridley is playing in Atlanta with Matt Ryan, who another Alabama wide receiver, and Julio Jones, who came out, was consistent and way over 60% his rookie year. There's talk, and we still don't know, if Julio Jones may be on the move out of Atlanta. It could put Ridley in almost the wide receiver 1A, 1B with Mohamed Sanu. But let's just say Julio Jones stay for purpose of argument. I think that Ridley is going to be under 50%. I think he'll be brought up slowly if Jones and Sanu are there together. I think he'll have a lot to learn. He'll have Julio to help him, but I do not see this guy coming in and doing much better than 50%. Therefore, that's where I'm going to put him at about a 45 to 50% rate for consistency. His rookie year, I just don't see him really setting the world on fire. There's just way too many, like I said, Amari Cooper comparisons for me, and that scares the crap out of me. You guys' thoughts?
Colby, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so here's the thing that we know with Ridley coming into this year. So you can already chalk up he'll have one bad game when Julio has his annual 200-yard outburst.
Right.
So that game he won't do much. However, if you watch an Atlanta game or you're a Julio owner, you'll know that once Julio makes a catch, he tends to come off the next play. So he might spend more time as that X receiver or that wide receiver one on certain routes than we might expect. However, it's hard to get away from those Amari Cooper comparisons. So I know what you're saying there, Bob. So I'm actually going to give him a 55% consistency this season, and Julio's never found in the end zone. So, maybe Ridley gets touchdowns instead of yards like Julio. They'll be the perfect counterparts where Julio gets the yards, Ridley gets the touchdowns.
All right, Ron?
I had him at about 50, between 45, 50%. I don't know. It's tough for me, and a lot of, like you said, a lot of it depends upon what ends up happening with Julio Jones. I don't really look for him to be sent out of town just yet. I think he'll be around there, and I think Mohamed Sanu is a good enough number 2 that he'll eat into those catches. But once again, you both said it, the Cooper comparisons. It's really hard to look at him as any other type of player. I don't know necessarily if the big games are going to be there for him. And once again, he's a rookie, and I don't know. There's not too many rookie receivers and tight ends that I'm looking too forward to count on 100% this year. But he's up towards the top. I mean, the potential's there. Obviously, he's a first-round pick player, so there's a lot to like there. Decent skill set, decent size. It just remains to be seen how he's going to be used in that offense.
Right. And I've heard comparisons to him kind of playing that Taylor Gabriel role from a couple years ago when Gabriel was kind of that deep threat and kind of keep the defensive honest. I could see Ridley playing that when we're having a three set receiver scenario where he's just kind of the deep route and just trying to stretch the field. And if teams are focusing too much on Julio, probably not as much on Sanu, but mostly Julio, then they could get burned. So I could see the occasional 3 catches, 100 yards, and a 70-yard touchdown, and that's Ridley's game. And but then the next week go back to 2 for 20. So that's kind of what I see happening. But like I said, we'll just kind of wait and see. So, all right, Colby, back to you with your last guy. That way, if whenever you need to go, you can go. Why don't you talk about your last pick and who you like? Where do you think you'll fall out at?
So in the 4th round, Dallas went and took Dalton Schultz out of Stanford. His value is really going to depend on if we get confirmation that Jason Witten is in fact going to the booth and not returning to the Cowboys. So Schultz was actually a tight end that I was rather hoping that Houston would go after, but he went to the wrong team in the state of Texas. So the big thing that makes me kind of intrigued with Schultz is the fact that when you look at his draft profile, they talked about that he's a capable and reliable target underneath. And that sounds a lot like Jason Witten and how Dak used Jason Witten. So, they have Rico Gathers, who's a really exciting player, and I think he could be that guy who could stretch the field at tight end and maybe run some of those more intricate routes where, we see Schultz doing the Witten routes where he runs 10 yards, sits at the first down marker, makes the catch, and falls down. So consistency-wise, not really a lot to expect here. And if for some reason Jason Witten would come back, Schultz is nearly irrelevant this season. So his consistency is going to be extremely low. But this could be a guy that near the end of the year, and if tight end gets decimated like it has in recent years, that you might be picking him up in some deeper leagues. But consistency-wise, maybe 15 to 20%.
Okay. All right. I don't know much about the kid, and like you said, I knew that he was kind of come in there and was drafted by the Cowboys as kind of a safety valve for Witten. We assume Witten's on his way out. And good for him. Like I said, he certainly has proven everything he has. He's going to go into the Hall of Fame. He could be first round ballot. It's hard to tell. But, they have this Rico Gathers, and that's pretty much what I read was Gathers was a really exciting guy, former, I think he's an Antonio Gates kind of guy, former basketball player, with some, great potential to kind of be that Antonio Gates and, Travis Kelce kind of player. Again, that's never been Witten's thing much, but he certainly has had some deep routes over in the past and has had some long touchdowns as a tight end. So, like you said, with Schultz being kind of behind Gathers, he probably would just fill that third down, get a first down kind of quality role. Ron, any thoughts on Dalton Schultz?
Not anything much different. The one thing I do think that gives him a little bit more of an uptick for me is being a Stanford guy, and it seems like David Shaw and it seems like Stanford cranks out some pretty solid pro guys, especially in these middle rounds. When you look at some of the guys that have come out, one that comes to mind is Richard Sherman. a few years ago. So I think he's got that going for him. Like I said, they can put some guys into pros that are solid contributors, may not be ultra flashy, but I think he's just a nice, solid tight end. I mean, I don't know, there's not much else to say. I don't know necessarily if he's going to be much up above that 20% consistency there. But like I said, it just, like Colby said, it depends on what happens with Jason Witten, but it also depends upon where he falls on that depth chart as far as Rico gathers, if he's going to be the guy that comes up and kind of takes that job away. So we'll see, but he's not a guy that I'm probably going to actively target in many leagues.
Gotcha.
Dynasty leagues maybe, so
right.
Not really.
Gotcha. All right, Ron, so you have an interesting pick here. It's a homer pick, you called it. I had to look this guy up because, again, I don't follow college as well as some of you guys do, but I had no idea this guy other than I thought maybe he was, Heinz Ward's son because his last name was Heinz. I don't know. But why don't you tell us about your pick here?
Okay, so like you said, I'm going full on homer here with the guy. And when we look at our team's draft, you always sit there and you look at some of the things they do and you kind of scratch your head. And so as I was scratching my head as to why the Colts skipped over some of those guys in the second round at running back, I do like the fact that they got Nyheim Hines in the fourth round. Running back out of NC State, and we know that running back, receiver, you can pretty much pick any position on the team. They needed depth at pretty much every spot. And so this is a guy that fell to the fourth round, graded out fairly highly. And, when you look at the NFL.com stuff, they grade him out as chance to become a starter. I think that's definitely there. I like him as far as what they have in that backfield because they have a lot of pieces, but I don't know necessarily if they have a guy that can hit home runs like this. Marlon Mack is there, and he can hit a few home runs last year on some big plays, but this guy's a burner. He 4.38 40 at the combine, 5'8", 198, so he's not ultra big. That gives me a little bit of concern, but I don't think that they're picking him and putting him in there as far as to be an every down guy, and I don't think that that's necessarily what they want him to do. I like the fact that he has that speed on that turf at Lucas Oil Stadium. I think that's definitely going to benefit him. And I think that he's a guy. He went in the draft today. I think he went around round 13 or so, if I remember right, somewhere around that vicinity. But I think of the guys that they have there, I think he can be a nice piece. Later on down the line, I don't think he'll beat out Marlon Mack as the main guy, but I think he's definitely going to contribute. But I like the value here. So I guess if I had to put his consistency somewhere, I'd say it's going to hover maybe about 40 to 50%, just depending upon how much volume he gets. So if it's something where they can get up and get a lead, he might get a few carries here and there. But if they're playing from behind and he can get some catches, I think that's a better fit from him. But the guy is a burner on that turf, and I really like that fit of him with the offensive line upgrades that they were able to make.
Okay, Colby, your thoughts on Hines?
I think there's some potential with Hines certainly, and obviously it's going to come down to the health of Andrew Luck's shoulder and if they're able to get leads, because otherwise, without Luck, I don't know their chances of leading a game this season could be a bit tougher. But no, Hines definitely has some potential, and he could almost be treated like Kamara from last year in the sense that he might be one of the more popular backup running backs selected in the later rounds of drafts, just because we don't really know what we have fully in Marlon Mack, or who knows, it could even turn into a timeshare. So There's still plenty of time till the season, but he could be one of the more drafted backup running backs to start this fantasy season.
So is his value in the PPR then, because he'll be catching the balls more than Marlon Mack will? Is that what you're thinking, either one of you?
I think so. I mean, I don't know necessarily if he's going to be, we're not going to expect any kind of reception numbers like Christian McCaffrey. His numbers from the last 3 years at NC State, he caught 20, 43, and 25 passes. So I don't think it's all that much of a stretch to maybe see him with, 30 to 40 catches possibly. But, like Colby said, a lot of it depends upon what happens with Andrew Luck and, if they're able to play with the lead or they're playing from behind. But I think 30 to 40 catches is a realistic number there.
Okay. All right, so we're going to move on to my second pick here, and I'm going to go with Rashad Penny, who went late in the first round to Seattle. I had to laugh. NFL.com, they do an NFL comparison to what they think this player's career is going to look like. Now, interestingly enough, Calvin Ridley was compared to Marvin Harrison, which I thought, wow, that's pretty high praise to put him against a Hall of Famer like that. Penny, though, is compared against Willis McGahee. Do you guys even remember who Willis McGahee was? Are you guys old enough
Of course.
to know?
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he kind of played in the 90s and 2000. I'm like, what, Jim Thorpe wasn't taken? I don't know. So they compare him against
Sammy
Willis
Baugh.
McKay, which, doesn't give me a warm fuzzy about his future potential, since Calvin Ridley was compared to a Hall of Famer. But, so Penny is kind of compared to, like I said, McGahee, kind of a volume carrying kind of running style. He's kind of one of those guys that, always is, his legs are always churning, and that's what they like about him, and that's great. He kind of has a beast mode kind of comparisons on his positive sides. Arm tacklers won't cut it. Runs with a stronger lower half. Finishes with the lower shoulder. Really kind of beats on the players. But the things they don't like about him is that he's a high cut upright runner, which usually will get you killed. Modest yards after first contact. Doesn't always show a feel for the best run lane choices. So, my thought is here's a kid that appears to have weaknesses that doesn't fit well with Seattle's bad offensive line. But then on the other hand, this kid has really no competition there. I mean, the Chris Carsons, the Mike Davises. I mean, it's boring as And if you think the offensive lineups of the Panthers and some of these other guys you were talking about are bad, take a look at the Seahawks if you get a chance. Holy cow. I mean, now Doug Baldwin is obviously a stud and Wilson's a stud, but after that, they're relying on a lot of nothing, and especially with the loss of Jimmy Graham, they have basically nothing at tight end as well. So I think this kid has potential, and he's playing in Seattle, and that'll certainly help. And he's pretty much got the job to lose in that offense. But I just feel like he's going to be a running back guy committee. He might have a flash in the pan here or there. It's just kind of a hot mess in Seattle. I think if he was playing for another team with a little more offensive weapons around him, I'd give him above 50% consistency. But I just don't think I can give that to this player, unless just some significant changes happen in Seattle, that they get some more offensive weapons to help that team. Right now, Wilson and Baldwin are going to have to carry this team. Penny's going to have to chip in. But I just think it's a hot mess in Seattle. I'm going to give it 40% consistency at this point, and applause to Willis McGahee for having a comparison to him. What are your guys' thoughts on Rashad Penny? Oh yeah, by the way, before you do go to that, fantasy value. Here's the one that really blew me away. So you heard what I just said. I obviously didn't watch this kid in college, so I don't know as much about him as you guys probably do. But he is at the end of the fourth round on a team. Mike Clay picked him at the end of the fourth round. So, Mike Clay's certainly a lot smarter than me based on where he's at in his life as a fantasy expert. So he obviously has a love for him. He made him his his RB3 after Le'Veon Bell and LaShawn McCoy. In fact, Clay took 4 running backs in the first 5 rounds. The other person was Gronk. But give me your thoughts on Rashad Penny in Seattle, end of the 4th round pick. What are your thoughts on that scenario?
Go ahead, Colby. I know you got to cut out pretty soon.
This will be a guy I'm avoiding. It's
okay.
First off, I know he was very productive in college. So I don't want to undermine what he did there, but
okay.
Seeing the Seattle running backs since Marshawn Lynch, it's been rough.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I honestly hope, given where they drafted him and how much I thought they reached for him, I hope they just give him every opportunity to be it. And even if he has 1 or 2 bad games, stick with it. The Chris Carson experiment, the J.D. McKissick, the Thomas Rawls, it hasn't really worked. Give this kid every chance. And I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, Penny was one of those guys who was a Pro Football Focus darling with some of his metrics that he had. So I believe maybe that's why Clay nabbed him in the 4th. So I think that's why, but the offensive line is bad. The impromptu offense Seattle runs hasn't been as great as it could be, and they need a running game to really balance that out. I hope Penny's the answer, but he won't be on many of my fantasy teams this season.
Okay. Ron?
Yeah, when I look at, I mean, I wouldn't take him that high, but I mean, I see where maybe he's thinking just because of from a volume standpoint, there's not much else there. Offensive line is going to be bad. I think I read somewhere the other day the Seahawks didn't have one running back run for more than 249 yards last year, so that kind of tells you the state that their offensive line is in. I look at the draft and where these guys kind of shook out off the board here. I think I would have probably taken Royce Freeman ahead of him, who went around later. There's a couple other guys here later on, rookies, that I might have considered, Ronald Jones possibly. But Penny's a guy that I think that, you look at in college, he was a backup to Donnell Pumphrey, who was a fourth-round pick for the Eagles, and we saw what he did. Now, I know there's a couple other guys there's a couple other guys in the Eagles' backfield, so, we'll give him a little bit of a pass, but he later on I might consider taking him, but he's definitely not a guy I'm going to target in the fourth round.
All right, Colby, it's a little bit getting pretty late in the show. Do you need to run, or can we go two more guys?
We can go two more guys. I'll stick around. I feel rude as a guest cutting out on y'all.
That's all right. All right, we got two more players left. Ron, it's back to you for your last pick.
Okay, so with my last pick here, I went away from the running back spot, and I went with the wide receiver. And like I said before, I'm not necessarily big on a lot of the wide receivers and tight ends coming out this year. And we were doing our mock with different sites earlier on in the week, and I was looking at this guy in the first round for a couple teams, and I just couldn't pull the trigger because when we look at first-round wide receiver consistency and just overall performance the last few years, you got to go back pretty far to see any guys that performed well in their first year. And so I think that's kind of the same thing this year. And I think with a lot of these guys that were drafted in the first couple of rounds, that their fantasy production is going to be kind of shaky. However, I do like the situation that this guy fell in, and that's Cortland Sutton, who went in the second round, 8th pick to the Denver Broncos. And I think the Denver Broncos had an excellent draft as far as getting Chubb to fall to them in the first round. Cortland Sutton, I mentioned Royce Freeman as well. So those are some guys that I think are some solid picks off the board. But Sutton goes into a situation where I think that he coming up in this year, maybe not a guy that I'm going to target early on, but a dynasty guy that I'm going to nab for sure because of the guys he has to learn from. He can come in, he can learn from a fellow SMU alum, Emmanuel Sanders. He's got Demaryius Thomas there. Don't sleep on Case Keenum as the quarterback. We saw what he was up to last year. I think he can have a nice season in Denver. And I like this guy. He's got good size, not an overall burner. I think he's going to be kind of that big body possession receiver, at 6'3", 218. So he's one of the bigger wideouts in this draft. Only ran a 4.5, so he's not necessarily known as a guy that's going to be a burner down the field. One of the big knocks on him was the separation from corners, but he is, like I said, fairly physical, fairly big, and he's able to kind of get free using his hands, using some physicality. And so I like that about him, and I think like I said, he ends up in a good spot. I like him being the third wide receiver there in Denver, and I think that I'd probably peg him maybe about 50% consistency. I think of all the guys that we've talked about, I like his situation the best, but he might be one that might struggle to find some volume here and there. But the other side, the guys he's playing with, if they can line him up in the slot or on the outside, he's going to get some attention taken away from him with the other two guys that are lining up there. So I do like him, but I think you got to kind of temper expectations, not just for him, but every wideout or tight end in this draft. So I say I'm giving about 50% consistency, I guess.
Yeah, and his ADP is the 13th round of today's draft, which again, he's going after basically the guys we talked about that were going in the 11th round. With DJ Moore, Ridley, those kind of guys. So I think, it falls out in good spot. Like I said, I think dynasty-wise, there's some great value there because I think, obviously, probably Emmanuel Sanders, maybe Thomas, those guys are getting near the ends of their careers in the next, 2 to 3 years. Not necessarily this year, but in the near future. So this kid will be the heir apparent. And, Denver's certainly trying to rebuild with some talent that they already have. So I agree. So, Colby, your thoughts?
Well, I think you hit it right on the head too. I think both of their contracts are up at the end of this season, so you'd have to figure one of those two are going to leave,
right? In
Thomas or Sanders. So, at the very least, next year you're looking at either the first or second option on that Denver team. And Case Keenum has shown he can keep multiple wide receivers fantasy relevant. He did it last year with Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen. So, Why can't he do it again? I mean, he's a former Houston quarterback, which which easily explains his success at the National Football League.
Of course, easily explains.
All right, he was so good there.
All right, so we're going to go to the last guy we've had on our list, and I had a lot of choices here. I had Christian Kirk in Arizona, Royce Freeman in Denver, Michael Gallup in Dallas. So there was a lot of good guys, but the one that I think intrigues me the most, and I, especially after reading some of the articles today about his supposedly appointment in Philadelphia, and I don't know if you guys heard about this, is Darius Geis. So rumors have it that he literally got into an argument with the people that he was kind of interviewing with in Philadelphia. I don't know if this came up after the fact when he got drafted by Washington to kind of throw it in Washington's face, whether it's a lie, whether it's not. Geis, of course, denies this happening. Found it just interesting because it's not, again, kind of came after the fact. If he gets drafted by, somebody else outside the NFC East, are they going to make an issue out of it? But regardless, Geis is now in Washington. The funny thing is the comparison on NFL.com is this guy is beast mode. The comparison was Marshawn Lynch with his furious running style, yards after contact, but that kind of stuff can get you beat down and hurt real quick too. But there's really nothing to compete with in Washington. He has Samaje Perine, who really didn't prove much. Chris Thompson is coming back from injury, but he's really the third down back. So this kid has the ability, if he plays hard, and he certainly plays with a chip on his shoulder. He had his dad was killed at 7 years old. He just plays with a lot of heart, and that's great. But he also has had a lot of recurring injuries, various stuff like that. I'm looking at it as Washington's kind of it's a tough offensive situation. Alex Smith will bring some consistency from an NFL standpoint of just keeping that team in check. They had Kirk Cousins. They did pretty well. Cousins did pretty well with the team around him, but I don't think Alex Smith is anywhere near Kirk Cousins' talent. They might need to rely on Geis and Perine to be kind of the core of the offense, and then the passing game kind of feeds off that. I could see Geis in the 55% if he if he gets to be the main starter. But if they do any time sharing, obviously that's going to kill him. The kid seems to have some talent. He seems to have a great heart. I'll give him a little love at 55%, but I don't see him breaking 60%. And again, a lot of it's going to depend on his touches in the game, how that's going to be managed by Washington, and with Perine in the backfield as well. What are your guys' thoughts on Darius Geis?
And I'm pretty sure Chris Thompson, he's coming off that injury, so he's going to be the pass catching guy. So just because they drafted him, I believe it's 40 or the 27th pick in the second round, doesn't necessarily mean that he's automatically the bell cow guy.
Right.
I do think all the stuff that came out with him slipping and perhaps the altercation, he comes in motivated to run, and that could be one of those stories we buy into, like the contract year, or he's really motivated this season. This could be one of those false hype stories we're getting behind. But I mean, he has every opportunity in that offense, and with some limited receiving options, you could say, in Washington, he could catch a few more passes out of the backfield than many people are expecting. Right. So 55% consistency seems fair.
Okay, Ron, before you go into your thoughts, Darius Geis in today's fantasy draft went in the middle of the fourth round ahead of Rashad Penny. Basically, outside of Barkley, I think is the next highest drafted running back, rookie running back drafted. What are your thoughts on that? That seems awfully high for a guy that I'm not 100% sold is going to be the starter in Washington at this point.
I don't know. See, I like him a lot. He's one of my favorite guys to come out, so I'm okay with that. I think that's fine. The thing is, we've been trying to, fantasy-wise, and the Redskins have been trying to make Samaje Perine happen for a few years, and it just hasn't happened. He's had some fumbling issues, and I think that, like you said, Geis comes in, he's got the chip on his shoulder, he's got good size for a pro back, he's got that beast mode comparison, so I don't have a problem taking him there in that fourth-round spot. And you look at what Bob Harris did. He took Kamara, he took Jordan Howard. Geis is his third running back, so
right.
I'm fine with him being your RB3.
Yeah, right. And again, it that's not a bad thought to be. Yeah, like you said, it's not like he made him as RB2.
Yeah.
He's taking a chance at RB3, but then again, you're also not picking quality wide receivers at that point. On top of that, now you've got Harris is relying on Robert Woods, Pierre Garçon, and I don't even see Kenny Galloway.
Well, he took Devontae Adams in round 2. Also.
I'm sorry, you're right. Devontae Adams round 2. Okay, so he's got Adams, Woods, and Garçon. Decent, not great.
Yeah.
I think he could have picked a better receiver. Maybe like a Golden Tate there, who's certainly has proved a better consistency. And then maybe Geis would have failed to the next round. It's hard to tell, but I feel like he really needed to get a more consistent wide receiver. But hey, who am I to judge? He's a Hall of Famer in the fantasy football world. So, and a great guy indeed. So Darius Geis, did we get? Yeah, did Colby? I'm ranting. Did Colby comment? You did.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, that's all. Guys, are anybody that we'll just kind of quick here. I know Colby's got to run. Any guy that we didn't talk about that maybe you thought about after the fact, like, wow, we really should have brought this guy up, that could be a fantasy force, I guess not a force, but a fantasy surprise based on where they're at or where they got drafted, that could put up some surprisingly good consistent numbers or surprisingly good fantasy numbers heading into this year.
I like Royce. I mean, we mentioned him a little bit. I like Royce Freeman a lot just because of the fact that C.J. Anderson's gone out of there. And I used this phrase when I was talking about Samaje Perine, and we talked about, guys that, we've been trying to make a thing in fantasy, and teams have given these guys a shot, and they just haven't done it. Devontae Booker hasn't stepped up and taken advantage of his opportunities. So I love them getting Royce Freeman where they got him, and I like the fact that to me he has a pretty clear path to a lot of playing time there.
Colby?
Well, I haven't gotten a homer pick in yet, so
okay.
I think it could make sense. But the Texans' 4th round pick, Kiki QT out of Texas Tech, he should be their slot receiver. He's going to compete with Bruce Ellington for playing time, but at the very least, what he could do is probably immediately step in as a Texans returner, and he can be a dangerous returner. I think he averaged his average return yards last season in college were pretty outstanding. So he could provide a boost to the Houston defensive unit, which could help that team's fantasy value. Or if he becomes that slot receiver, we saw how they moved Bruce Ellington all around and got him involved in all these gadget plays. So he could be a sneaky option later in the season once we see his role in the Deshaun Watson-led offense.
Plus, he's got the cutest name ever.
Definite QT.
Kiki QT. Nice.
There it is.
If I had to pick a guy, and I went brain dead. Tampa Bay picked a running back, and I can't remember who it was. Ronald Jones II. I mean, basically, he's only got to compete against Peyton Barber and Jacquizz Rodgers. I mean, this guy could come in. They really were high on, everybody. When I remember him getting picked in the draft, everybody seemed to be very high on Jones, coming in there and being a starter. And if he can be semi-worthy and help, at least keep the defensive honest, I like this kid a lot in Tampa Bay. Being a decent back, he could kind of like Jordan Howard did a couple years ago, kind of sneak in surprisingly and be that 60% back that nobody was really counting on. Tampa's offense is, passing wise is pretty decent, and they stretch the field well and could certainly benefit from a good running back. So Ronald Jones II is kind of my guy. Your guys' thoughts on him?
I agree.
Well, yeah, I liked him coming out. He was a guy that I wish the Colts would have taken a long, hard look at. But, he did fall in a great situation. There's not much to compete with. And it seems like there's quite a few of these guys in this draft that at running back, they kind of are going to just earn the carries by default. There's not a lot of competition.
Gotcha. All right, well, guys, thank you so much for being here this week. Colby, thank you for the honor of coming from Fantasy Alarm and filling in this week as our special guest. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you on Twitter and your other writings going on this time of year?
Like Bob said, find me over at Fantasy Alarm. I'll pop up every now and again here at BGFS, and once football comes back around, a more frequent presence like some of these running backs who seem to be getting carries. So
there you go.
Find me there. Find me on Twitter at Colby R. Conway, and is glad to be back and be back with the fellas again.
Yeah, definitely. Ron, tell us everybody what you're up to and where they can find you.
Find me on Twitter at TheRealMaday, and you can obviously find me at Big Guy Fantasy Sports. We've got the On Deck Circle hitter edition. The salesman Matt Sells that got you some pitchers last week. One of his guys, Mike Soraka's coming up, so he hit one on the head right there. A nice little prospect in the Braves organization. I got you some hitters that could be on the horizon in the next few weeks. Hopefully, you can catch that. You can catch us here. You can catch me on the Fantrax Dynasty Baseball podcast and the Nasty Cast with the heartthrobs that are Nate Dokken and Van Lee. And you can also catch me over at Fantistics from time to time doing some daily player analysis.
All right. Well, thank you guys again. Colby, pleasure as always to have you on and being our special guest. And everybody, we'll be back again next week. We'll be rolling through the wide receivers. We've done quarterbacks and our running backs and quarterbacks. And so we're going to be hitting the wide receivers for the next few weeks, kind of breaking down the veterans and their consistency, and where now that we're starting to get some more clear ADPs, we'll see where they're falling out at, and Ron and I will break those down probably over a 2-3 week period because it takes a while to get through them, and we'll be there next week for you. So for Colby and Ron, I'm Bob Lung. You can find me at Bob_Lung and at Big Guy Fantasy Sports. Thanks again for listening to the Fantasy Football Consistency Show. Everybody have a great week. God bless. Take care, and we are out.